Here we get into the Vendidad itself. Fargard 1 out of, well, it doesn't, well, there's at least 22 here. Yeah. This chapter is an enumeration of 16 lands created by Ahura Mazda and of many plagues created in opposition by Angra Mainyu. Notice how there's 16 chess pieces on each side. Many attempts have been made not only to identify these 16 lands, but also to draw historical conclusions from their order of succession as representing the actual order of migrations and settlements of the old Iranian tribes. But there's nothing in the text that would authorize us to look to it, even for legendary records, much less for real history. Well, I don't know about that, but it certainly could have mythologized such things. We have here nothing more than a geographical description of Iran, such as might be expected in a religious work like the Vendidad, that is to say, one that contains mythical lands as well as real countries. Well, mythical and unreal is not the same thing. It is not easy to decide with perfect certainty in every case whether we have to do with the land of the former or of the latter kind, owing partly toward efficient knowledge of the geography of ancient Iran, partly to the fact that names originally belonging to mythical lands are often in latter times attached to real ones. Well, remember the biblical use of myth. A myth and a fable is not the same thing. Cleverly imagined stories, well, okay, that's fables, full of meaning, myth, and purpose, Of these 16 lands, there are certainly 9 which have really existed, and of which we know the geographical position as we were able to follow their names from the records of the Achaemenian kings, or the works of classical writers down to the map of modern Iran. They are the following. Sugda is the second. That's the Zen name. You have Mo'uru, which is the third in the list. Bakde, fourth, and sixth is Haroyu. Ninth is Veherkana. 16th is Haravaete. 11th is Ha'e Tumant. 11th. 12th is Raga. 15th is Hapta Hindu. And we have in Old Persian Suguda, Margu, Baktre, Hara Iva, Varkana, Hara Uvate, skipping 11 to 12, Raga, and 15, Hindavas. In the Greek we have Sag, Dian, Mar, Gian, Baktra, Araya, Rakania, Arak Otas, Atamandras, Ragae, Indoi. And the modern name, Samarkand, Merv, Bok, Haravud, Gorgon, Harut, Helmand, Ra'i, Pungab, or is it Pungab? The real existence of Nasaya 5 is certain, although its position can't be determined. For other lands, we are confined for information to the Pahlavi commentary, Kakra 13 is only transliterated. Whether the name was then too much known to require any further explanation or too little to allow of any, Urva 8 is described as being Masan, the land of Masan, or the land of the great, a name which, applied to the Sasanian ages, to the land around the Ispahan, for Varuna, the four-cornered. Number 14, the commentator hesitates between the Padesh Kvargar mountains, the Elabors, and the Kirman, hesitation easily accounted for by the fact that Varuna is the seat of the struggle between Aziz Dahaka and Thra-e-Ta'ana, between the storm serpent and the storm entity, and was formerly the four-sided heaven. Modern tradition decides in favor of Padash Kvargar, probably because the serpent was at last bound to Demavand, the highest peak in that chain. The claims of Kirman were probably founded on the popular etymology of its name, the land of snakes. And remember, similar legends exist to mythologize the conquering of the Bon places or other faiths existing before Tibetan Buddhism came into the Tibetan area. And it turns out that they found evidence of certain violent persecution, so that could be it. The Achaemenian kings, because there was a rewrite of things at the very least at that point, or an attempted compilation, which I'm, sure included some stuff. Kareta of the evil shadows is identified. 8 is identified with Kabul. Whether rightly or wrongly, we're unable to decide. As it is spoken of only as the seat of the ventures of Keras-Aspa, it may be suspected this assimilation rests merely on the fact that, in later tradition, the legend of Keras-Aspa was localized in the tableland of Pashansa'e in Kabulistan. And isn't this one of the two places in Afghanistan where you have, an ancient fire temple that's remained in operation? In his enumeration, there seems no apparent order whatever, and Ormazd in his creations seems to travel all over the map, forward and backwards, without the slightest regard to the cardinal points. Yet the starting point and the final point have not been arbitrarily chosen. The first land created was the Ariana Fa'ago by the Vangohe Da'etya, and the last was the land by the Ranga. Now, the Vangohe and the Ranga were originally the celestial rivers that came down from earth to heaven as two heavenly Gangas to surround the earth, one in the east, the other in the west. This is why the creation begins with the land by the Vangohe and ends with the land by the Ranga. The Oxus and the Indus were believed to be one and the same river, and the myth that of the central island thing and stuff, this seems to be more inserted rather than, you don't have the same sort of story with some of the parts where there's actually a conversation with Zarathustra, or he receives a sacred formula to recite. These sort of stories aren't among that. As I'm saying, people mythologized their environments and all that. In the Sasanian ages, when the Tigris was definitely the border of Iran in the west, the Ranga was identified with it, and the 16th land is accordingly described in the commentary as being Arvastan-e-Rum, or the Roman Mesopotamia. But all the Avestan passages in which the Ranga is cited refer to its mythical nature as the river in the far-off horizon, as surrounding Okeanos, and now and then still resembling its Vedic homonym, the Brasa, as the river that divides. I wouldn't say the angels from the demons, you could say, because certainly the Devis were worshipped, but there's a distinction, you could say, between the Devis and God in some texts. But so many cultures worship their angels, the unfallen ones, and the fallen ones becoming the fiends. The first land, the Ariana Vaego, by the Vangohe da Itcha, remained to the last a mythical region. It was originally the abode of Yima and of the righteous, that is to say, a particular form of paradise. Later on, it was looked for in the countries north of Adarbajan, probably in order that it should be as near as possible to the seat of Zoroastrian religion, yet without losing its supernatural character by the counter-evidence of facts. Well, its spiritual importance isn't supposed to disappear with the physical whatever. It's supposed to work together, isn't it? This brought about the division of the Van Gohe da Itcha into two rivers, as the Ariana Vaego was localized in the country north of Adarbajan. The river in it must become identified with the Aras, but at the same time it continued to surround the world eastward under the name of Vengohe, which was the Sassanian name of the Oxus Indus. It seems that in the time of Herodotus, the Araxes and the Oxus were considered one and the same river, as the Oxus and the Indus were later on. This would account for his strange statement that the Araxes, which is confessedly with him, the Oxus are Yaxartes, springs from the lands of the Matianians, like the Ganges, and flows eastward. And at the same time, this would account for both how the Ariana Vaego could be localized in the basin of the Araxes, and how the Oxus could flow eastwards to fall into the Arabian Sea. Whether in the time when Fargard 1.1-6 were written, the Ariana Vaego was still believed to be in the far-off lands of the rising sun, already in the banks of the Aras we leave undecided, and running under the Caspian Sea as Arethusa runs under the Sicilian Sea, and the Ranga itself under the Persian Gulf. And it follows hence that no historical conclusions can be drawn from this description. It was necessary that it should begin with the Vangohe and end with the Ranga. To look to it for an account of the geographical migrations is converting cosmology into history. Well, history and cosmology certainly have a secular way of expressing themselves too. But again, ideally they're supposed to be, together. Of the counter creations of Angra Ma'enu, there's little to be said. There are different vices and plagues. They are generally unconnected with the country to the creation of which they answer. Some of them are expressed as a paz lagmena, the meaning of which is doubtful or unknown. If we assume that the only lands belonging to the Iranian world were admitted into the list, the mention of the 7 rivers would indicate that the first Fargard was not composed earlier than the time when the basin of the Indus became a part of Iran, that is, not earlier than the reign of Darius I. And Fargard 1 is, it has 21 parts, which is an important sacred number in both Masagasnaha Zarathustra and the Yazidi. So, Ahura Mazda spake unto Spitma, Zarathustra, saying, I've made every land dear to its dwellers, even though it had no charms whatever in it. Had I not made every land dear to its dwellers, even though it had no charm whatever in it, then the whole living world would have invaded Ariana Va'ego, the first of the good lands and the countries which I, Ahura Mazda, created was the Ariana Va'ego, by the good river Da'etya. And I'm seeing 5. So are they thinking that there's missing verses here and that they're really 81? Because I'm seeing this listed as 5. But the love of blood and soil is natural. But, it doesn't have to lead to prejudice or other sorts of injustice. Spitta mead is the most beneficent, and it turns out not to be of James Darmesteter does not believe that this is a family name. Everyone fancies the land he was born and brought up is the best and fairest land that I've created. Oh, I thought it was going to be a comment. It's a comment. That's just another comment. So this is to illustrate the alternate process of creation. First, Ahura Mazda would create a land of such kind that its dwellers might like it, and there could be nothing more delightful than he who is all death would bring against it a counter creation. Therefore came Angra Ma'enu, who is all death, and he counter-created by his witchcraft the serpent in the river, and winter, a work of the Da'avas. 9. There are 10 winter months here, 2 summer months, and those are cold for the waters, cold for the earth, cold for the trees. Winter falls there, with the worst of its plagues. 13. The second of the good lands and countries which I, Ahura Mazda, created was the plains in Sogda. Thereupon came Angra Ma'enu, who was all death, and he counter-created by his witchcraft the fly Skaetya, which brings death to the cattle. 13 instead of 5, and 17 instead of 6. The third of the good lands and countries which I, Ahura Mazda, created was the strong and holy Ma'uru. The good Da'etya, the Da'etik, comes from Iran Veg, Iriana Vego. It flows through the mountains of Gorgistan, Georgia. It was, therefore, in the time of the Sassanids, a name of the Araxes. There are many Krafstras, and the Da'etik, it is said, the Da'etik full of Krafstras. The serpent in the river was originally the mythical serpent Aziz, who overthrew and killed the king of Iran Veg, Yima. Then it was identified as appears from the Bundahis with the snakes that abound on the banks of the Araxes. As Iran Veg is a place of refuge for mankind and all life from the winter that is to destroy the world, winter was thought by a mythical misunderstanding to be the counter-creation of Iran Veg, hence the glacial description of that strange paradise. Vendidad Sada, it is known that the ordinary course of nature, there are 7 months of summer and 5 of winter. Some say that even the 2 months of summer are cold for the waters. In Vendidad Sada, the rains that core in the heart of winter. There's doubt as to the name of the river, the Zarafshan. Suguda is Sogdiana. There's the word unknown in regards to this fly, but it's possibly the cattle fly that hinders itself among the corn and the fodder and stings with a venomous sting the ox that eats of it. Yeah, I don't like certain bug sorts of things, but certainly some evil or something could be attached to such things.